The elevator chimed at midnight, and she should have turned around, but she didn't. Not when the city still flickered beneath her like something breathing. Not when the adrenaline in her chest drowned out logic. Not when the dare pulsed in her ears louder than her conscience. Sophie stood in the service hallway outside the top floor of the Ashford Empire building, pressed against the cold wall, her fingers trembling around a stolen security badge, and her heart racing like it was trying to outrun common sense. Her friend had laughed when she handed her the keycard at the bar hours earlier, eyes glassy, voice teasing, daring her to sneak into the office of New York's most infamous billionaire just for one picture, just one shot in his chair. Proof that she wasn't always the careful one, the quiet one, the girl who never crossed the line. Sophie hadn't planned to say yes, but plans had stopped making sense ever since she found out her scholarship was being delayed and rent was due by Monday, and no one in the financial aid office answered her calls anymore. So she said yes. She took the keycard, caught the last train, and made it past security with a borrowed smile, telling herself she'd be up and down in 5 minutes and no one would ever know. The lock clicked, and the frosted glass doors opened with a whisper. The office was massive, the kind of room where people signed deals that changed skylines, and in the half-light cast by the Manhattan night, it looked both powerful and intimate. Every surface gleamed, every angle sharp and intentional, from the steel fixtures to the leather chairs to the heavy wood desk that sat like a throne at the edge of the city. She stepped inside, her boots making no sound, lifting her phone with shaking hands, telling herself again it was just a dare, just one photo, nothing more, until a voice cut through the stillness like a thread pulled too tight. "You're not very good at breaking and entering," the voice said, calm, deep, almost amused, and Sophie turned, heart stuttering. He was standing in the doorway of an adjacent room, one hand resting on the frame, sleeves rolled up, tie undone, the kind of man who looked expensive even in exhaustion. And she recognized him immediately, not from the news or the magazines, but from the sheer presence he carried like armor. She froze. "It was a dare," she said, her voice small, her explanation thinner than the air between them. "I wasn't going to steal anything, I swear." He crossed to the bar, poured a drink without looking at her, the clink of glass loud in the quiet. "People do a lot of stupid things on dares," he said, sipping slowly. "What's one more?" She should have left then, but he didn't tell her to go. Instead, he asked what she was studying. Architecture. She asked what he was still doing in the office. Avoiding a party. They talked. Somehow the world outside disappeared, and the conversation turned from awkward to strange to surprisingly natural. She sat on the sofa, curled her legs under her, listened to him describe how silence was the only thing that didn't lie, and when her eyes grew heavy, she drifted. But the cold woke her hours later, and when she searched for a blanket, she opened the wrong door. He was awake, sitting on the edge of his bed, the city behind him. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She almost backed away. Almost. "Just a minute," she whispered. A minute turned into a moment, a breath, a touch, a night that should have meant nothing. She told herself it was a one-time mistake, one that would disappear with sunrise. But 6 weeks later, in the cracked mirror of a dorm bathroom, Sophie stared at a test with 2 pink lines and realized she wasn't just pregnant, she was carrying the child of a man who didn't know her name, and whose empire had more zeros than her entire life combined. Sophie Lane had never broken the rules before, not really. Not in the way that mattered. She crossed streets only when the signal flashed, paid her bills on time when she had the money, color-coded her class notes, and double-checked the expiration dates on every carton of milk. She was the kind of girl who kept Band-Aids in her purse just in case someone else needed one, the kind who answered phone calls with "hello," even when it was an unknown number, the kind who didn't make waves, not because she couldn't, but because waves meant attention, and attention meant risk. She grew up in a one-bedroom apartment in Queens, with a mother who worked 2 cleaning jobs and a younger brother with asthma. Sophie had started working when she was 14, first at the corner deli, then bussing tables, then checking coats at a downtown restaurant where no one ever remembered her name, and she'd been grateful for the invisibility. Invisibility meant safety. College had been the first thing she wanted just for herself. She didn't care about frat parties or football games or internships with glossy companies. She cared about space and shape and how buildings made people feel. She wanted to be the kind of architect who didn't just build things, but created places that felt like home for people who'd never really had one. She got in on scholarship, rented a shared room in a 6th-floor walk-up with peeling paint and mice in the walls, and thought maybe, just maybe, she was finally building something of her own. But life had other plans. By the time she stepped into the Ashford building that night, Sophie had 3 unpaid library fines, 2 overdue essays, and 1 very clear understanding that no one was coming to save her. She didn't even want saving, not exactly. She just wanted to feel something again, something different from the constant weight pressing down on her shoulders. And Liam Ashford was the last person on earth she should have crossed paths with. Liam wasn't just rich, he was generationally untouchable. He wasn't flashy like the tech bros, or loud like the real estate moguls. He was quiet, calculating, the kind of man whose eyes didn't miss a thing, and whose name sat on half the buildings downtown. Born into legacy, raised among expectation, Liam didn't have the luxury of softness. By 34, he'd restructured his father's empire, acquired 3 national chains, and become one of the most watched and feared figures in New York finance. Articles called him the Silent Strike, a man who moved like smoke and left nothing untouched. People whispered about him, of course, that he didn't believe in marriage, that he'd turned down press interviews for years, that no one had seen him with the same woman twice. His office was like a fortress, closed to everyone but his inner circle, and no one got into that space without an invitation, which made Sophie the exception to a rule that had never been broken. The next morning after their night together, she woke up alone, wrapped in a throw blanket that smelled faintly of cedar and clean linen. On the coffee table sat a glass of water, a folded napkin with the words, "You can keep the story," scrawled in neat handwriting, and a business card with no phone number, just his name. She'd stared at it for a long time, heart knocking unevenly in her chest. Then she slipped it into her coat and walked out the same way she came in. She hadn't told anyone, not her roommate, not her best friend, not even her reflection. For weeks, she convinced herself it had meant nothing, that it was just one reckless night in a lifetime of careful ones, that it had passed through her like a fever and would leave no mark. Till the nausea started. At first she thought it was stress, then a stomach bug, then nerves. But when the days kept slipping by without an answer, when her cycle didn't come, when the dreams started, strange, vivid dreams, full of whispers and static and a pulse that didn't feel like her own, she bought the test. She didn't cry when it turned positive. She didn't scream. She didn't even sit down. She just stared at the plastic stick like it had rewritten her entire future with 2 pink lines. He didn't even know her name. She didn't know his phone number, and yet somewhere in the middle of all this steel and glass, all this luck and legacy, Sophie Lane now carried the one thing Liam Ashford never planned for: his baby. The first time Sophie saw Liam Ashford after that night, her hands were shaking so badly she had to grip the strap of her tote bag just to keep them still, the bag itself digging into her shoulder like a reminder that she didn't belong here, not in a place with gold-trimmed elevators and marble floors that reflected her scuffed sneakers like a cruel joke. She hadn't planned to come, hadn't wanted to come, but 6 weeks of silence and a test that changed everything had left her with no choice, because this wasn't just about her anymore. And as much as she wanted to pretend she could handle it alone, she knew she couldn't. Not entirely. She had rehearsed what to say a dozen times, every version of the truth, from clinical to desperate, but none of it prepared her for the moment the receptionist glanced up from her desk, took in Sophie's anxious expression, and said without blinking, "Mr. Ashford is in, you can go up." Like this happened every day, like girls like her walked into his life with trembling hearts and news that broke futures clean in half. The elevator to the top floor opened directly into his office, just like last time, but this time the space felt colder, more distant, more guarded somehow, like the walls themselves had shifted in his absence. He was standing by the window, back turned, the skyline blazing behind him in shades of steel and fire. He didn't move when she stepped out. He didn't speak until she cleared her throat. "Liam," she said, and the name felt strange in her mouth, too familiar and too foreign at once. He turned slowly, and for a moment, neither of them said a word. She couldn't read his expression. He wasn't angry, he wasn't surprised. He was unreadable in the way only a man who had mastered silence could be. "You're not here for another dare," he said, more statement than question. "No," she said softly. "I'm here because I have something to tell you." And then she said it, not with drama or tears or some sweeping declaration, just plain and clear and quiet, the way truth sometimes is when it's too big to dress up. "I'm pregnant. It's yours." He didn't blink, didn't flinch. For a second, she wondered if he'd heard her at all. Then he set down the glass in his hand, walked toward the desk, and sat. "How far along?" "6 weeks," she said, "since that night." Still no reaction, just a nod. "Have you told anyone?" She shook her head. "Not yet." "Do you want anything from me?" The question hit like a slap, sharp and impersonal, but she understood it, understood the shield behind it, the need to define terms before emotions ruined everything. "I don't want money," she said quickly. "I'm not here for that." He looked up then, really looked, and something in his gaze flickered. "Then what are you here for?" Sophie hesitated. "I don't know. I just thought you deserved to know, that's all." She turned, ready to leave, the weight of her words heavier now that they were out in the world, but his voice stopped her. "Wait." She froze. He stood, walked around the desk, and stopped in front of her. "You really weren't going to ask for anything?" "No," she said, "because I don't need a billionaire, Liam. I just needed to do the right thing." Silence stretched between them like a live wire. Then he said, "You're braver than most people I know." She didn't reply. Didn't trust herself to. "Let me take care of things," he said after a beat, and she almost laughed. "Take care of things?" she echoed. "Like it's a press release or a broken contract." He exhaled. "I'm not good at this." "What, feelings?" she said before she could stop herself. He didn't deny it, just watched her, eyes steady, voice lower. "I meant life outside this building." Something about the way he said it made her chest tighten. She should have left then, should have walked out and never looked back. But she didn't. Over the next few weeks, things changed in ways she hadn't expected. He didn't vanish. He didn't ignore her. Instead, he called. At first, just to check in, then to ask questions, then just to hear her voice. He sent her vitamins and fresh groceries when he learned she was still living in that cramped apartment with 2 roommates and a shared bathroom. When she refused his money, he sent books instead, on pregnancy, parenting, architecture even. She didn't know what he was doing, whether it was guilt or something deeper, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, they started talking again. Not just about the baby, but about each other. He asked about her childhood. She asked about his mother, the one name that made him go quiet. She found out he hadn't celebrated his birthday in 10 years. He learned she had a fear of drowning after falling into a pool as a kid. The more they talked, the more she saw behind the armor. He wasn't just powerful, he was lonely. And she wasn't just poor, she was surviving. One afternoon, he invited her to lunch. Not a formal thing, just something quiet in his private dining room upstairs. She showed up in jeans and a sweater that barely fit anymore, expecting awkward conversation and maybe a salad, but what she found instead was Liam standing in front of a plate of pasta he'd made himself, looking both proud and slightly embarrassed. "I watched a video," he said when she stared. "Don't get used to it." She laughed for the first time in days, and it startled them both. She stayed for 2 hours. They talked about nothing and everything. At the end of the meal, he walked her to the elevator and didn't say goodbye, just looked at her for a long moment, like he was memorizing her. Days turned into patterns. Calls in the morning, visits every few days. The city outside didn't stop, but inside the strange orbit they had created, things started to feel almost real. One night she brought him a sketch of his office redone with softer lines and warmer tones. "You make this place feel less cold," she said. He didn't say anything, just reached out and touched the edge of the paper like it was something fragile. They didn't kiss, they didn't touch, but the distance between them narrowed, until it didn't. Until everything shifted again, because nothing stays quiet forever, and the moment people started to notice her name on the visitor log, everything they had built, every fragile thread of connection, was put under a microscope. The whispers started, first inside his boardroom, then across the media, and Liam Ashford, the man who controlled everything, was about to discover that the one thing he couldn't silence was the truth about the woman carrying his child. The whispers began like cracks in glass, barely noticeable at first, then spreading faster than Sophie could brace for. It started with a photo, blurry but unmistakable. Her stepping out of a black car in front of the Ashford building, her hair windblown, hand resting instinctively on her lower stomach. The kind of image that didn't say anything explicitly, but invited assumptions to run wild. A gossip blog posted it under the headline, "Mystery Girl in Billionaire's Orbit," and just like that, Sophie Lane was no longer invisible. At first, she didn't think it mattered. She wasn't famous. She wasn't trying to be. But within days, she couldn't go to class without feeling eyes on her, couldn't walk into a cafe without overhearing her name twisted into rumors she hadn't earned. Someone called her a gold digger under their breath in the library. Someone else asked if she was selling her story. Her professors stopped calling on her. Emails from her design internship were suddenly cold and infrequent. And worst of all, her scholarship committee asked to schedule a reevaluation. She felt her world tightening around her like a fist, but she didn't tell Liam, not right away, because he was already being pulled in too many directions. Meetings, press events, a board vote approaching, and the very public engagement he was being pushed toward with the daughter of a tech empire, a deal disguised as marriage, clean, strategic, and devastating. Sophie tried to disappear, wore oversized coats, pulled her hair back, avoided the Ashford building altogether. She stopped answering Liam's messages not because she was angry, but because she was terrified. Terrified of what it meant to let him care for her when she had nothing to offer, but a heart already cracked and a body no longer her own. But Liam noticed. He always noticed. And on the fourth day, without a reply, he showed up outside her building, not in a car, not in a suit, but in jeans and a gray hoodie, looking more like a man who had been lost than one who had built empires. He didn't say anything at first, just leaned against the brick wall, eyes on her window like he was willing her to appear. When she finally came down, he didn't ask questions, didn't scold or press. He just looked at her and said, "Are they hurting you?" And something about the way he said it made her chest fracture a little more. She shook her head, then nodded, then said nothing at all. But that was enough. He took her hand gently, walked her 2 blocks to a quiet diner, sat across from her in a booth that smelled like syrup and old vinyl, and waited. She told him everything then, about the whispers, the looks, the loss of her internship, the scholarship hearing, and the hollow feeling that came from being judged by people who didn't know her name last month. And when she was done, when her voice cracked from holding it in too long, Liam reached across the table and said, "Let them talk, Sophie. You don't owe anyone an explanation." And she wanted to believe that truly, but reality was crueler than principles, and her life didn't exist in penthouses and glass offices. It existed in rent bills and university policy. The next morning, he pulled every legal string he had, issued cease and desist orders to every blog that mentioned her name, had his media team wipe digital footprints, but the damage had already rooted. The boardroom was buzzing, the investors were whispering, and the engagement he had been trying to delay now came with ultimatums. Either he went through with it or risked losing the Walton deal. And with it, a third of Ashford Holdings' future ventures. Liam didn't care about the deal, not really, not until his board reminded him that thousands of jobs and contracts hung in the balance. He was furious, cornered, and more than anything, he was afraid. Afraid of losing Sophie, not because she was carrying his child, but because she was the only thing in years that had made him feel like something more than a machine. Like a man. When he told her the truth about the deal, the engagement, the pressure from his board, he expected her to yell, to cry, to accuse him of using her. But she didn't. She just nodded slowly and said, "You have an empire to protect." And he hated how calm she sounded, how much it felt like goodbye. She tried to leave that night, told him she needed space, that maybe they were just 2 people from different stories, trying to write the same page. He begged her to stay, not with promises or apologies, but with silence, with the way he touched her hand, with the way he looked at her like he was drowning and she was the only shore in sight. But she still walked away. The following days were slow and sharp. She went to her scholarship hearing, faced a panel of suited people who asked invasive questions with polite smiles. Liam stayed out of it at her request, but she felt his presence anyway, like a storm behind glass waiting to break. The decision was delayed, and she knew what that meant. She started packing. Her lease was ending soon, and she had no clear place to go. She thought about moving back to Queens, to her mother's apartment, to a room that wasn't hers anymore. But before she could leave, something shifted again. A news alert flashed across her phone, A press conference announced by Ashford Holdings. She clicked the live stream out of instinct, not expecting anything, but what she saw made her drop the mug in her hand. Liam standing at a podium, suited, calm, his board behind him, the Walton heiress nowhere in sight. He cleared his throat once and said, "I know the world expects men like me to choose strategy over emotion, legacy over truth, but today I choose something else. I choose to speak plainly." And then he did. He didn't name Sophie, didn't exploit her, but he spoke about love, about mistakes, about how sometimes the things that look like detours are actually the road we were supposed to be on all along. He said, "I met someone who reminded me what it means to care about something real. She doesn't want my money, she doesn't need my name, but she carries my child and more courage than anyone I've ever known." And the room went silent, her apartment went silent, her chest went silent, because for the first time, someone had chosen her not in private, but out loud. When Liam walked out of that conference, his phone lit up with calls, some furious, some supportive, but the only thing he cared about was the message waiting from her. Just 4 words, no punctuation, no flourish, just this, "Are you coming over?" And he did. He ran, and when he got there, she didn't say anything, just opened the door and pulled him inside and held on like he was something worth holding on to. He whispered against her hair, "I'm not afraid anymore." And she whispered back, "Then neither am I." But peace, for people like them, never lasts long. Not when the past is still watching, and not when the truth finally finds its way into the wrong hands. The calm didn't last. Not in a world where power was currency, and every move was observed, analyzed, weaponized. For 3 weeks, Sophie and Liam lived in a fragile bubble, suspended above the noise. She didn't move in with him, not officially, but she started spending nights in the guest bedroom of his penthouse, the one he refused to call a guest room anymore. It became her space, slowly, subtly, one book at a time, one blanket, one sketch left on the windowsill after a restless night. Liam tried not to pressure her. He gave her space, let her work on class projects, respected her independence, but every time she walked into a room, he looked at her like she was air after a long time underwater. They didn't talk about the baby constantly, but it was always there, a quiet hum beneath every conversation, every glance. He came with her to one of the appointments, sat silently in the corner of the clinic's waiting room, unreadable in a gray hoodie and baseball cap, until they called her name and he stood like it mattered. She wasn't showing yet, not really, but his hand hovered protectively over the small of her back, like he was already carrying the weight with her. Inside the exam room, when the monitor lit up with a flickering heartbeat, she didn't expect him to react. He was so controlled, always. But he didn't look away. He leaned closer, eyes fixed on the screen like it was something sacred, and when the sound came fast, rhythmic, strong, he closed his eyes and exhaled like something inside him had been holding its breath for years. After that, things felt different, softer, realer. He started cooking more, though he was terrible at it. She teased him and he let her. They shared takeout on the floor of his living room, watching old movies she loved and he pretended to hate. One night she caught him reading a baby book, half asleep on the couch, glasses crooked, his head resting against a pillow she had brought from her old apartment. She snapped a photo before he woke up. She didn't post it anywhere, she just wanted to keep it for herself, proof that this version of him existed, if only for her. But then the envelope came. She found it slipped under the door of her apartment. No name, no return address, just thick cream paper folded over a single glossy photograph. It was her, stepping out of Liam's building, one hand again resting on her belly, hair loose, face turned slightly down. The photo wasn't threatening on its own, but the note was. "You're not fooling anyone. He always trades up." Sophie stared at the words for a long time, hands trembling, jaw clenched. Her stomach twisted, not just with nausea, but with fear. Someone was watching her. Someone knew. She didn't tell Liam right away, not that night, not the next, but he noticed the shift, the way she pulled away from his touch, the way her laughter faded at the edges, the way she looked over her shoulder when they walked outside. He asked once, "What's wrong?" and she said nothing. He didn't press, but he watched and waited until one night, as they sat quietly in the kitchen, eating Chinese takeout out of cartons, she finally said, "Someone sent me a picture." Liam set down his chopsticks slowly. "What kind of picture?" She slid the envelope across the table. He opened it, read the note, studied the image for a long time, his face unreadable. Then he said, "It's starting." Sophie looked up. "What's starting?" "The whispers. The digging. They do this every time I get close to someone." His voice was calm, but she could see the tension in his jaw, the way he held the paper too tightly. "I've been preparing for it. I just didn't think it would come this soon." "Who are they?" she asked quietly. He looked at her then, really looked. "People who benefit from me being alone." The next morning, her name appeared on a tabloid blog. No headline, no proof, just a picture and a caption that read, "Mystery girl caught sneaking out of Ashford Tower. Scandal or surrogate?" The article didn't use her full name, but it didn't have to. By lunchtime, her classmates were texting her. By dinner, her professor called to discuss academic standing. Liam's team worked fast, pulled the article down, threatened lawsuits, buried search results, but the damage was done. Her scholarship committee called again. She didn't answer. Her mother texted, "Are you okay?" She didn't reply. She stopped going to class, stopped drawing, stopped sleeping. She lay awake at night beside Liam, staring at the ceiling, wondering how something so private had become so loud. Liam did everything he could to shield her. He tightened security, blocked reporters, banned staff from speaking to media, but he couldn't protect her from the weight of being the girl in the photo. Then came the board meeting. Liam was called in for an emergency session. Investors were concerned. PR was spinning out. The Walton family, his supposed strategic match, publicly denied any misunderstanding, but privately threatened to pull their funding if he didn't correct course. One executive even said, in a closed meeting, that Liam was becoming soft, distracted, weak. Liam didn't say a word, just looked at the man, eyes cold. The room fell silent. That night, Sophie stood on the balcony of his penthouse, arms wrapped around herself, city lights flickering beneath her like static. He stepped beside her, silent. She didn't turn to look at him. "You're losing everything you built," she said softly. "It's just money," he replied, but his voice betrayed him. "No," she said, still not turning. "It's your life, your reputation, your future, and I don't want to be the thing that ruins it." He reached for her hand. "You're not. You're the only part of it that makes sense." "Then why does it feel like we're holding our breath?" she whispered. Liam didn't answer, because she was right. Every day since the envelope, every moment since the article, felt like waiting for the other shoe to drop. He had weathered lawsuits, takeovers, scandals, but this thing with Sophie, this possibility of a life that wasn't curated or controlled, terrified him. And that's when she made the decision. She didn't ask, didn't warn him. She packed a small bag, just a few essentials, a few pieces of clothing that still fit, and a printed sonogram folded into a book she hadn't finished reading. She left the apartment quietly early in the morning while Liam was still asleep. On the kitchen counter, she left a note written in pencil on the back of a delivery receipt. "I'm so sorry." When Liam woke up and found it, he didn't move at first. He just stared at the words like they didn't make sense, like they couldn't possibly be hers. Then something inside him cracked, not with anger, not even with grief, but with the kind of realization that rips the air from your lungs. She was gone, not because she didn't love him, but because she did. Because loving him, in her eyes, meant letting him keep the life he had built without sacrificing it for someone like her. But Liam Ashford had made a career out of reclaiming what others said he couldn't have, and he wasn't done fighting yet, not for his empire, not for legacy, not even for his name, but for her. For the woman who slipped into his life like a mistake and turned it into the first thing that ever felt real. Liam didn't call his driver. He didn't call his assistant. He didn't even change clothes. He walked out of the penthouse in nothing but a black t-shirt, gray sweats, and the kind of stillness that felt more dangerous than rage. His security team spotted him by the lobby doors, eyes wide, asking if something was wrong, but he didn't stop walking. What could they do? Guard him from heartbreak? He drove himself across the city, down streets he hadn't touched in years, away from boardrooms and private elevators and curated penthouses, searching for someone who had disappeared without a map. He started with the places she mentioned in passing. The public library she loved for its quiet, The corner cafe with the almond croissants she always said she couldn't afford, but treated herself to once a month, the bookstore near her old apartment. Every door he opened came with a polite shake of the head. Sorry, haven't seen her. He went back to her old building, spoke to the landlord, who told him she had vacated early, left the keys under the mat, no forwarding address. She seemed tired, the landlord had said, but calm, like she'd already let go. Liam didn't eat, didn't sleep. He didn't go to meetings. He missed 2 investor calls, ignored 6 emails from legal, and let the press speculate about whether he had cracked under pressure. Let them. Let the world wonder what happened to the man who never made mistakes, never lost control, never broke formation. Because the truth was, he had made one mistake. He let her walk away. And then, on a rainy Thursday morning, a package arrived at his office. No return address, no signature. Inside was a silver necklace, the one he had given her. Nothing flashy, just a simple chain with a tiny star, a piece he had picked out quietly from a local artisan shop, something he thought she could wear without feeling owned. Beneath it, folded carefully, was a note. This was yours before me. It shouldn't remind you of pain. His breath caught. For the first time in years, he sat down slowly, not because of exhaustion, but because his knees couldn't quite hold the weight of emotion sitting in his chest. He stared at the necklace, fingers brushing the charm, and realized something he had avoided admitting all this time. He hadn't been afraid of love. He had been afraid of needing someone more than they needed him. But Sophie hadn't asked for anything. She had given everything, and when it got hard, she chose to protect him instead of fight for herself. That night he walked into his office, past the floor-to-ceiling glass, past his assistant's worried glances, and said 3 words. Cancel everything indefinitely. She looked up. Are you stepping down? He didn't answer right away, just picked up the necklace, slipped it into his pocket, and said, No, I'm stepping into something I should have chosen a long time ago. A week later, in a small coastal town in Maine, Sophie Lane sat on the porch of her aunt's house, a book in her lap she hadn't really read, her body heavier now, not just from pregnancy, but from absence, from silence, from the ache of what she had chosen to leave behind. The air smelled like sea salt and pine, and the wind carried whispers through the trees, the kind of stillness that usually soothed her but now only made her feel more alone. She hadn't heard from Liam. She hadn't expected to, but she still checked her phone every night. That afternoon, a black car pulled into the gravel driveway. She didn't move, not until she saw him. He stepped out slowly, no suit, no entourage, just Liam, looking exhausted and real and completely out of place in a driveway full of wet leaves and scattered pine cones. His eyes found hers instantly, like a compass finally settling on north. She stood without knowing how. Her hands trembled, but not from fear. She walked to the edge of the porch. He walked the rest of the way. How did you find me? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. You left your birthday marked on my calendar, he said softly, and I figured if you didn't want to be found, you wouldn't have done that. She laughed. Just a little, the sound sharp with disbelief, warm with recognition. Her eyes brimmed. You gave everything up? He stepped closer. Not everything, just the things that never really mattered. She shook her head, tears spilling over now. Why are you here? He didn't hesitate. Because I loved you when you walked into my life by accident, he said, voice raw. And I love you more now that you walked away, knowing exactly who I am. She stared at him like she was trying to memorize him all over again. And maybe she was. Because this Liam, this version stripped of wealth and noise, was the only one she had ever wanted. I was never supposed to matter this much, she whispered. He smiled, slow and full of something broken and whole at once. You were never supposed to be a dare, he said, but you became my truth. The wind stirred her hair. The book in her hand slipped from her fingers and landed on the porch with a soft thud. Her voice trembled. What now? He reached for her hand. His fingers were cold, hers were warm. Now, he said, I stop pretending I know how to do this perfectly, and I start showing up anyway. She stepped into his arms without another word. He held her like she was the only thing worth holding, and this time she believed he wouldn't let go. That night, she didn't fall asleep alone. He stayed. He made tea with too much sugar, read a chapter of her book aloud, stumbling over the French phrases, kissed her forehead when she curled into his side, and when she asked him, "Are you sure?" he answered with a breathless, "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." The next morning, the world kept spinning. The headlines shifted, the noise faded, but in the quiet of that small house, a new life was beginning, not just the one growing inside her, but the one between them, fragile and honest, finally real. They didn't need a wedding, yet, or a name for whatever they were. They just needed a chance, a choice. And for the first time in both their lives, they had made it, together. 3 months later, the world had moved on. The articles were buried beneath newer scandals, the investors quieted once the numbers stabilized, and Ashford Holdings continued to grow, with Liam back at the helm, but different this time. He didn't explain his absence, didn't hold a press conference or offer rehearsed apologies. He simply returned, sharper in his decisions, steadier in his voice, and with something in his eyes that hadn't been there before, something softer, something human. Sophie didn't move into the penthouse right away. She still kept her own place, a small apartment with sunlight on the kitchen tiles and plants she was learning not to kill. She went back to her classes slowly, spoke to her professors, fought her way back into the design program. She didn't want to be a secret, and Liam never let her be one again. Wherever he went, she walked beside him. Charity events, quiet dinners. The occasional photographed moment outside his office building, hand in hand with no explanations offered. No apologies made. She no longer felt like someone who had stumbled into his world. She felt like someone who belonged there, not because she changed to fit it, but because he adjusted his world to make room for hers. Her baby bump grew, so did the weight of the life they were building, one without labels, without headlines, without the need to prove anything to anyone but each other. They didn't speak about marriage much, not because they didn't want it, but because what they had already felt deeper than ceremony. He made her tea every morning, brought her snacks she didn't ask for, sketched plans with her late into the night for a nursery they hadn't even finished painting. She filled his silences with laughter, calmed his sharp edges with questions that made him stop and think. Sometimes they fought. Sometimes she cried, but they always came back to each other, not with grand gestures, but with quiet truths. On the 6-month anniversary of the night she lost that dare, Liam brought her back to the same building, the Ashford Tower, same elevator, same hour. But this time, there was no stolen keycard, no shadows, just him, guiding her gently through the doors with a small smile and a box in his hand. Inside the penthouse, everything looked familiar but warmer now. There were signs of her everywhere, a throw blanket over the couch, a pencil sketch on the fridge, a chipped coffee mug that said, "World's Okayest Artist." The bedroom door was open, the sheets turned down, and on the pillow sat an envelope with her name, in his handwriting. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside wasn't a proposal, or a check, or a contract. It was a note. "I never believed in accidents until you." She looked up, eyes glassy. "This is where it started," she whispered. Liam stepped behind her, arms sliding around her waist, his hands resting gently on the curve of her belly. "No," he said against her ear, voice low, steady. "This is where I began." They stood there for a long time, just breathing, just being. And it wasn't about money or image or lust anymore. It was about the way he looked at her, like she was the only person who'd ever really seen him. It was about the way she let herself be loved, not because she was perfect, but because she was real. They didn't need to say forever. What they had was more honest than vows, more permanent than paper. They had survived the noise. They had chosen each other when it wasn't convenient. And in a city built on ambition, on power, on empires made of steel and glass, they had built something else, a family. And as the night wrapped around them like a secret no longer hidden, Sophie whispered the words that started it all. "I still can't believe one stupid dare led me here." Liam smiled against her skin. Sometimes the wrong dare leads you to the right life. And this time, they both knew it was true.